In this video, we're going to see how we can use useReducer hook to create our own custom useState hook, right? Now, before we start, the prerequisite for this video for you would be that you're familiar with hook-based React, and if you're familiar with especially the useState hook and the useReducer hook. I'm not gonna explain how useReducer works in so much detail. So if you're not uh, familiar with it, then you can just go to the React documentation or watch any other video on useReducer. Moving on, here is the app I've created for this explanation. Now, this is a simple counter app with some FizzBuzz logic built in. Now, if you're not familiar with FizzBuzz, it's a simple interview question. Like, I don't know who asked this question in interview, but still I have heard that this is a pretty famous interview question which goes like this: like, if the given number is divisible by 3, then return fizz. If it is divisible by 5, then return buzz. If it is divisible by 15, then return fizz buzz, right? So similarly, what we are doing here is like, we have a counter 0 1 2 3. Now 3 is divisible by 3, so it is fizz. Now then again, 5 is divisible by 5, then it is buzz. 6 is divisible by 3. Now you get the point, right? Okay. Now if you need a second, then you can pause this video and go through the code yourself. It's a pretty easy app. So we are using the built-in useState hook. So now I'm gonna remove this, import and replace it with useReducer. So obviously it will give an error because there is no useState. So we will create our own function. Okay, so the function signature would go like this: like, it takes an initial state as argument, like the original useState hook used to, and then we are gonna return a state and a set state function, right? Because we are destructuring the values here. It means we are returning an array whose first values is the state itself, and the second one is a set state function. So we are gonna call it dispatch instead of set state here, because in useReducer by convention we call it a dispatch instead of a set state. So let me just call the useReducer hook. Okay, so our work is not done yet. We have to pass a callback value, and the second argument would be the initial state. Now usually in the callback it is something like the state and action, and then what we do is we do some calculation here using the switch case. Usually the action would be of type object, which contains a type, key, and a payload. And inside this block now, and inside this callback, we switch over the action.type, and according to the type the user has dispatched, we set the state according to it, right? Now in this case we don't need to apply any logic here. The thing we want is whatever the user is passing using the set count, which is inherently calling the dispatch function we are returning, just get the argument and set it as the new state, right? So what we are going to do is just return the action. So in our case, the action is not the object which has a type and a payload. In our case, it's the current state, right? It's the new state. So it would be better to call this variable new state instead of action here. Let's say we are calling it new state. So let's see if it works or not. So we got the initial state working, right? We are able to see 0. Now if I click on increment, then yeah, the counter is working fine. So yeah, the counter is working fine, but our work is still not done. Now, so one improvement we can do, like, it is not necessary, but as we are not using this state variable, instead of calling it state, we can just make it an underscore just to indicate that we are not using this variable, right? Now the second main bigger issue is that there is another way of calling the set state function. So this is the simple way, like we are just passing the new state, right? But there is one method in which we use a callback function. uh, so it goes like this, like if your new state depends on your previous state, then use the callback method, right? So user do it like this is the previous, and we are just going to return previous plus one. So it would be like the previous count, and the new state would be the previous count plus one. So this is a callback function. So now our decrement is using the decrement is using the simple method, and the our increment uh, type is using the callback method. Now if you will see, like the our in decrement button is working clearly fine, but if I click on the increment button, it will just throw an error, like in the console you can see that a function are not valid react child, which means it is setting the callback function as the state itself, because we are just returning the state here, right? So and then we are showing a function here, so that is why it is yelling at us that functions are not a valid react child. Now we can solve this using some logic here. So before we were just returning the new state directly. Now what we will do is check. Now before we were returning the new state directly, so now what we will do is check the type of the new state. Now if I log console.log type of new state, I'm just logging here like what's the type of new state. So let me clear the console, and if I do the decrement button, then we are getting a number because count minus one gives us a number. So but if I click on the increment button, we are getting a function. So that is the error, we need to catch. So what I'm gonna do here is if type of new state equal to function, then we are not going to return new state. What we are going to do is we are going to return new state, because now new state is a function, so we have to call it, and we have to pass the current state in it, right? Because it is expecting a previous state. The previous state is the state value. Now we made it underscore because we were not using it, but now we need to use it, so we will make it state again, and we will pass that state in the new state function. Now it looks pretty weird, but okay, it is fine. We know what it is doing, right? You can add a comment here if you like to. Now if we go line by line here, you can see like if the type of new state is a function, like we are passing a function, then it checks it, then it checks its type, and then calls this callback function passing the current state, and that then it returns the current state plus one, which would be initially the current state would be 0, and it will then pass 0 plus 1, which would be 1. So if I click on increment button, now it is working fine. So the increment button is the callback way of calling set count, and the decrement is the older way, the simpler way. So the decrement button is also working fine. So my friend, we have created the useState hook using the useReducer hook. Now if you have any questions, you can ask in the description, and if you want me to make a video on any other topic, then please comment. And if you like this video, then please hit the like button, it helps me. Thank you for watching. And yeah, I almost forgot that I'll be putting the code sandbox link for this app in the description, so if you want to check out, then please go ahead. Again, thanks for watching.